Yedidi, HaRav Chavivi, HaRav Shloim Agadas Meshlita, HaRav Mordechai Shapiro, HaRav Rabam Nosson Pearl, and all those that are the Oisim Ma'asim of the Shiurei Torah. Besides the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, today we'll be going to be Mekayim the mitzvah according to the Ravid and according to the Rash Mishans of the mitzvah of Bzchiras Mechias Amlek, because they learn Pshat in the Rais and Torah's Koyanim by learning halachas. That's your Mekayim the mitzvah. The Gemara and Daf Aleph in your countries is the Gemara in Megillah Daf Yud Ches Amar Aleph. The Gemara over there quotes this brayso from Torah's Koyanim, and it's also a Sifri in Parshas Kitzetzei, that the Gemara says, brings the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if you read Megillah Esther al Peh lo yotza, you're not yotza by reading the Megillah al Peh, you have to read Metech HaKsav. So the Gemara asks me, Nolan, how do we know that? So the Gemara answers, Omar, Rova, ask you, learn how to exert Shov Zechira, Zechira. Ksiv Hacha, here it says, Vayomim Moelen Niskorim Benasim. This is the pasuk in the Megillah Esther. Ksiv Hasam, in the parsha of Vayov Vayamolek, it says, Ksoiv Zoi Zikorin Basefer. So it says Zikorin over there, Niskorim in Megillah Esther. So we have Exeter Shova. So we learn Mala Halon Basefer, because it says Ksoiv Zikorin Basefer. Should be written Dafke in Sefer. And here too, in Megillah Esther, has to be Basefer. So the Gemara asks me, how do we know this? Zechira means to remind yourself, to mention, maybe to remember. How do you know it means to read it? Even in Balma, maybe it just means, I hope so. Yeah. Shkoyach. Maybe it just means to look into it and you don't have to actually read it. So the Gemara answers, can't mean that. The Tanya, because in the Raisa in Parshas B'chol Koysain in the Sifri, in Parshas Kisei, it says Zochor is Asheros Amalek. The word Zochor, Yochor, I might think it means believe. In your mind, you just have to remember what Amalek did. However, Kishuhemer, when the pasuk ends off and says Loisishkach, shouldn't forget it. Hareshikchas Halev Omor. So forgetting it, the lava forgetting it in your mind is already quoted. Amani Mekayim Zochor, so Zochor has to add something more to that, has to mean that it's prepared. So this is how we learn that in order to be yoitze, the Parshas mitzvah of Zechiras Mechias Amalek, it's not sufficient to just think about it. You actually have to read the Parsha. Here we get to the mitzvah of Kriyas Parshas Zochor, which is Bezras Hashem Shabbos. We'll have the opportunity to be kind of this great mitzvah. Now, if you turn to page Gimel in your Kuntras, we have a Tosfos over here in the beginning of the second Perek in Masechta Brachos, Daf Yud Gimel Amar Aleph, as that Tosfos says, the Ma'iri b'Parshas HaMechuyov and Likvais Doiraisa K'may Parshas Zochor. The Parsha that you mechuyev to read in HaTorah like Parshas Zochor. So we shouldn't think that the Braisa, which the Gemara quoted before, was an Asmachta Ba'alma, but really it's only a Rabbanan reading Parshas Zochor, which you know is a Parsha which you mechuyev to read Midoiraisa. Tosfos in Megillah Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis says the same thing. The Rashba and the Ritva over there also say that it's Doiraisa, and in the Piskei Tosfos over there in Megillah it also says it's Doiraisa. And so too in the Rosh over here, the Tosfos Rosh here, and the Tosfos Rabbi Yehud in Brochus, they all say that it's Doiraisa. The Tosfos Rabbi Peretz, the Tosfos Shams, and Soita Daf Yud Gimel says it's Doiraisa. The Smak and the Trumas Hadesh and Simon Kuchestis all say that Parshas Zochor is Doiraisa. Now, truthfully, the Magen Avraham, well, actually, it's turned to page Dalet. In your Kuntras, you have the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch, which he bases his halach on these Tosfos. And he says, this is in Simon Tofresh Pei Hey Sip Zayin, says, Yeshoimrim, that doesn't say Parshas Zochor or Parshas Poraduma, Chayovim Lekroisa, Midveraisa. Yichot Bnei Yeshuvim, She'en Lehem Minyan, Tzrichim Lobo, Lamokim She'esh Minyan, Shabbos Es Halolu, K'dei L'shmei Parshi Yoselo She'em Midveraisa. It says both of these parshas are the Raisa, Parshas Zochor and Parshas Poraduma, and the Magen Avraham argues on the Parshas Poraduma part. And if you look in the Berhei Tev, quotes the Tosfos that it says both Parshas Zochor and Parshas Poraduma. The Be'er HaGoyla says they're both Raisa. And if you look at the Ma'ariv Mekayim, they quote, if you look over there, you won't find it. Because it only says Parshas Zochor, it doesn't say Parshas Poraduma. So the question is, what happened to Parshas Parah Aduma? That's a shir b'fnei atzmai. I'll just tell you b'kitzur nimrod. What I believe happened over here was, I did look in the Venezia Druk of the Chas, and over there Taisus does say Parshas Parah Aduma as well. Like it says, actually, the lotion of the Taisus is Parshiyos HaMuchayav and Likros Deraisa K'may Parshas Zocher. There's more than one parsha that's with read in the Raisa. So Parshas Parah is the other one. Lamaisa, why don't we have it in our Tosfos? What I believe happened was, if you look over here on the page Dalil in the Bir HaGra, at the end of the Bir HaGra, he writes, he talks about the reason why the Mechaber says both Parshas Zocher and Parshas Parah Aduma. So the Gra just ends off like saying that if you look in the Rosh over there in Perek Vav, the Brachas Leisa, you won't find it over there. Ela Zocher. The Nuscha Mishu Peshes Nizdam Naloi. The Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, found a Vergreiste Nusach where it said Parshas Parah as well, but it's wrong. It's a mistake. What I believe happened was, even though all these Rishonim do say so, Parshas Zocher and Parshas Parah, our Shasim that we use today, almost all of them are copied from the Vilna print. And the Vilna printers, being that the Gra says it's a mistake, they took it out. But really, the Be'er HaGoyla was the Gra's Rebbe. He didn't have the Vilna print, obviously. So he had the old print, and there it said Parshas Zocher and Parshas Parah. And the Be'er also didn't have the Vilna print, so he also said Parshas Parah and Parshas Parah also. Lamaisa, the book here in page where we quoted the Nachal Eshkol. Nachal Eshkol wants to explain page Yud Dalet in your contrast. The Nachal Eshkol says that where does the Parshas Parah come from? He says it was a mistake. What was the mistake? The mistake was that the Kavanosam, Taisus, when they wrote it, when they printed the first print of the Taisus, they wrote Parshas Zocher, Vov Pei Pei. And the Bocher, the Zetzer, the printer, he looked at Vov Pei Pei. What other parsha could there be that could be the Raisa? So not long after Parshas Zocher, you learn Parshas Parah. So he wrote Parshas Parah, and he wrote it out, and it was Parshas Parah. But really, Taisus is talking about which kriyas are the Raisa, Parshas Zocher, u Parshas Purim. Vov Pei Pei is Parshas Zocher. Yom Amlek, Sheyotzen Bonami, Bzchiras Amlek, like the Magen Avraham holds. So Memela, that was the mistake. That's what he says. Lamais, I doubt that he's correct in this, because if you look in all the other Rishonim that quote this halacha, that it Parshas Zocher and Parshas Parah Aduma is Doraisa, to say that there was a Bocher Azetzer, in the Rashba and in the Ritva and in the Pesachya and the Taisus Rebbe Yehuda, there's so many places where it's quoted both. It's difficult to say that it's a mistake. But Lamaisa, that it's a Bocher Azetzer, it's a mistake. The Gross says it's wrong, but really, it wasn't the Bocher Azetzer, it's a mistake. It really said so on the places. Now, there's a lot of raid on this. Where does Parshas Parah come from? It's a shir b'fnei atzma. I'll just tell you, b'kitzur nimrod. There is a teretz in the Avodas Yisrael from the Kosher Mitzvah to this kasha where we see that Parshas Parah Aduma is D'oraisa. There's a teretz in the Aruch HaShulchan over here in Tafresh Pehei where we see that it's D'oraisa. There is a teretz in the Meshech Chochma from the Or Sameach where we see it's D'oraisa. And there is a teretz. I'll just tell you one of the tirutzim. There's a teretz from the Malbim and Artzes Achayim, and the very same teretz it also says in the Tshuvas Harugas Haboisim Siman Reish Hey and Or Achayim B'Shem the Yismech Moshe, and the very same teretz that Shabbat Rov writes in Doivim Mishorim. I'll just tell you the kids of the teretz. They say you have to have a pasuk in the Torah where it says there's a mitzvah to read this. There's no pasuk in the Torah that says there's a mitzvah to read Parshas Parah. But our Gemara here that we said in Daf Yud Ches Amar Aleph from Megillah, how do we know the Zechiyah and Kriyas Zechiras Hamolek, Parshas Zocher? Where do we get that from? Because it says Zocher and like Tishkach. The Tishkach tells you Shchichas Alev. So Behechrech Zocher has to mean a Kriya. You have to read it as well. Now by the Chet Egel it says, Zocher al Tishkach is Shechtzavt Lashem Alekecha Bamidbar. Al Tishkach means don't forget it. And Zocher means you have to read it. Now, Chazal didn't want to be Mesakim a parsha of reading the Chet HaEgel. They didn't want to be stuck on such a parsha. So instead, what they did was, if you look in the Rashi at the beginning of Parshas Chukas, where is the Parsha of Porah Aduma, the Rashi brings from Rabbeinu Moshe Hadarshan that the Porah Aduma is a tikkun on the Chet HaEgel. The Porah Aduma is a tikkun on the Chet HaEgel. So Chazal were misaken takuna to read to be mekayim the doirais of Zochar al Tishchach Yisrael Tzafta for reading Parshas Porah Aduma. That's how they for this kasha. Like I said, there's other terutzim, but this is their teretz that they say. Okay, getting back to our halacha, we're saying now that Parshas Zochar is a doirais. Now, Parshas Zochar is a doirais, so we have to treat it with all the sveikas like a sofik doirais. So turn to page Chof in your contrast, which is the first chinuch that you have here in your booklet. Page Chof. Yeah. I guess that's page 21, maybe in your cheshbonus over there. Right here it is. Mitzvah Tov Reish Gimel is mitzvah liskor mash osa Amalek liyisrael b'tzeisam in Mitzrayim. That's the mitzvah of remembering what Amalek did to Eden when they came out of Mitzrayim. He goes misharosh ha-mitzvah losas alibeinu and there's a mitzvah to hate Amalek. And the Medina mitzvah shomer zechronim l'roch shechiv zechirat zuhi belev ubepeh. It's both belev and bepeh. And then he says the reason is kadesh lo yishkach hadover, it shouldn't be forgotten. And the purpose of it is to fulfill the mitzvah of mechias Amalek. If we strengthen our hatred toward Amalek, our hatred to Amalek will be item that we should be goyim, that we should be moich Amalek mitachas hashamayim. Now, on page Chafal, the next page on the top is the continuation, the end of the Minchas Chinuch in this mitzvah. And he says, this mitzvah applies in all places and in all times, b'schorim, but only for the male Eden, because it's only for them to do milchama and to take nekama from the enemy, loyal נשים. So the Chinuch Rishon says specifically there is no mitzvah for Noshim to remember what Amalek did. So the Chinuch paters Noshim from the mitzvah of going to shul this coming Shabbos to hear the Parsha Zochar. Because it's not their mitzvah to destroy Amalek, so it's not their mitzvah to remember it either. They're from this mitzvah. Now, there are a number of proponents that are Machayev Noshim in Kriyas Parshas Zochar, that they do have to go to shul. And there's basically 5 arguments that they put forth to bolster their shita. And we're going to explore them today, B'ezras Hashem, and this year. And we're going to try and understand where the chinuch is coming from by ignoring these 5 arguments. The Minchas Chinuch here mentions 4 of the arguments. The 5th argument, which I think we'll look at first before we look at the Minchas Chinuch, the argument of the Maril Diskin in the Kuntras Achron in Siman Kuf Beis, in the Juvas of the Maril Diskin. It's on page Chof Hey in your Kuntras. Okay, it's underlined over here, Siman Kuf Beis. It says, "V'mogen Avram kosav the noshim chayoves b'kriyas haTorah, v'nearly the Pasha Zochel man domet havim in haTorah gam b'noshim havi partoy." So he's one of those. There's 3 main poskim of the famous ones that are the proponents of Noshim going to have to hear to be mechuyev in the Doiraisa of Kriyas Parshas Zochar. One is the Minchas Chinuch, one of them is here the Maril Diskin, and the other one is the Binyan Sian, Shem his Rebbe Rav Avram Bing, who was mekabelet from his Groise Rebbe, Achoset Shebek Huna, Mesher HaGodel, Rav Nosson Adler was also some Seifers Rebbe. He also was from the Mechayvim. So these really are the 3 main Mechayvim, and we're going to explore their arguments and to see how the chinuch is going to be able to answer these times. He says over here, it's not a mitzvah shezman geroma. It's a mitzvah to me this. The chiyuv of reading it once a year on Shabbos Parshas Zochar is merely a takonas chachomim, but it's really a mitzvah to me this. And it could be the reason why it's once a year, because it takes a year to forget. So in order to maintain the remembrance of Amalek, you have to read it once a year to make sure that you never forget. But it's really a mitzvah to read it, so it's not a Asman Darama, and therefore Noshim should be Machoyev. That's one of his arguments. Another argument he gives is, Shregam Noshim Hoye Bechlal Ritzoyno Shel Amalek B'Hashmodas Yisrael Chas V'Sholom. The Amalek also wanted to destroy not just the menfolk, but also the women, and therefore, midin afhin hoye boise hanes. Like we find three mitzvahs that we have. The Gemara in Megillah Daf Daled Amud Aleph says Noshim Mechuyev in Mikra Megillah Shafin hoye boise hanes, and the Gemara in Pesachya Daf Kuf Ches Amud Beis Noshim Mechuyev in Dalet Koises Shafin hoye boise hanes. And we also find it in Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph in Masechet Shabbos that Noshim Mechayev in Havlakas Chanukah Shafin hoye boise hanes. With that reasoning, says the Maril Diskin, it should really apply here as well. But Noshim should be mechuyev in Kriyas Parshas Zohar because Amalek was out to kill the Noshim as well. Now let's stop, and then of course let's finish off the shtickle. And then he says he should the imishum, and if it's because the Noshim allowed bnei kibush ninhu, not the nois melchama. This we know because the Gemara says so. In numerous places, we find it in Kedushin Beis Amud Beis. It says in the pasuk, "Noshim are potter from Pirya V'Rivya," because the pasuk says, "Kruvu Omilu Esratz V'Chivshuha." Chivshuha means conquer it, and Noshim Lav Nois Melchama Ninhu. They're not part of Kibush, and therefore Noshim are potter also from Pirya V'Rivya because they're potter not Nois Melchama. Also, we find the Gemara in Nozer Tafnam Pesach Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, "How do we know that if a lady goes out wearing Yiklei Melchama, that she's over allowed in the Torah?" How do we know that? Because it says, "Lo yek kligever alisha." An instrument of war is a kligever. It's a male instrument, not a lady's instrument. So if a lady is walking out with some kind of an instrument of war, she is over on the lava lo yek kligever alisha, which is not the nois Melchama. So, but here we have. We all know because we saw it before already in the Mishnah. It's in the Maram Premise. The Mishnah says that Melchemet's mitzvah fil kalam echuposa. So he says the imishum the noshim labnei kibuchnenu the natina me'aytayim anoshim pe'yivrim mikrod v'chetshuah ulo yadifu zechira me'asiya. So it can't be better if they're potter from the Melchama. They can't be chayav in the zechir to remember Amalek if they're potter from fighting Amalek. This is not true. He says why. The literally, Kivon the Kaimlan, since we pass into the Melchemes mitzvah kol yoytma afil kalam echuposa. And king dam noshim bechlal. Keinu b'mishnah soita afil kalam echuposa. B'meila du adin l'tzchira. So b'meila he wants to be mechayev noshim in zechira the same way. This is the tshuva fun made from the Maral Diskin. We're going to just discuss the afin hoye bois hanes before we get back to the Minchas Chinuch, because the Minchas Chinuch also argues these other arguments of his, and we'll discuss that with the Minchas Chinuch. In the meantime, the Minchas Chinuch doesn't mention the fifth argument that we have why Noshim should be mechuyev is afin hoye bois hanes. Now, to answer this taina, what is the Chinuch going to do with this with Paters Noshim? Why don't you say afin hoye bois hanes? I think there's a few cheshbonis we can have over here. Number one, there's a machlokes Rashbam and Tosfos in the meaning of afin hoye bois hanes. The Rashbam holds that in order for Noshim to be mechuyev in a mitzvah, they have to be the Ikar Hanes. And the three places in Shas where we find those three mitzvahs that Noshim are mechuyev shafin hoye bois hanes, in all three of them, the Noshim were the Ikar Hanes. Yitzias Mitzrayim, Chazal tell us, B'shvil Noshim, Kol Yoyis Nigalo Yisrael Mitzrayim. So they caused the Ikar Hanes. That's why we're mechayev them in Talikosis. Rashbam also says, as far as Ner Chanukah, afin hoye bois hanes, because the nace happened because of Yehudis, which was a lady. And the same thing, he says, about Mikra Megillah, Esther Hamalka played an integral role in that nace, and therefore, afin hoye bois hanes. According to the Rashbam, the Maril Diskin's argument wouldn't hold water by Zechiras Mechias Amalek, because even though Noshim were also part of the Gesera, but they weren't Ikar Hanes. We don't find that Mechias Amalek Noshim were the ones that saved the day. Mamela, that's why we would have to say that according to the Rashbam, we couldn't be Mechayev because afin hoye bois hanes. The second cheshbon we have is that Tosfos, although Tosfos holds that being part of the Gesera of Lahashmed V'Aragal Abed is the Pshat has nothing to do with Moshe being Ikranes. So here they're also, like the Maril Diskin claims, they were also part of the Gzeira of Amalek. Therefore, Moshe should really be Mechuyev according to Tosfos Al Kapon. But we have a Tosfos in Megillah Daf Aleph, where Tosfos asks Akasha, why do we need a Gzeira Shova to be Mechayev Noshim and Achilas Matzah the Pesach? Also says Lo Soichal Olav Chomet Shivas Yom Toichal Olav Matzos. What do we need a pasuk to tell you that? Why don't you just say Shafin Hoy Boy Sanes? That should be sufficient. So Tosfos answers that Avin Hoy Boy Sanes can't be Mechayev you and Adveraisa. It can only be Mechayev. The whole concept of Avin Hoy Boy Sanes is a rabbinic concept. It's only a Rabbanon. It can't be Mechayev them Adveraisa. And the Torah wanted to be Mechayev them and Achilas Matzah. So this is a Adveraisa for Noshim as well. So that's why the Torah gave us a Gzeira Shova to learn out from L'Tzeichel Olav Chomet Shivas Yom Toichal Olav Matzos. According to that Tosfos, we would have to say that even if we were to say Avin Hoy Boy Sanes, it would only be Midrabanon, Pasha Zohar, it wouldn't be a Doraisa. Furthermore, Tosfos in Pesachya Kuf Ches Amud Beis asks Akasha, why are Noshim Potter from Yeshiva Sukkah? Why don't we say Avin Hoy Boy Sanes? The Noshim were there as well. And Tosfos L'Shitos, it doesn't have to be with Ikranes. So why don't you mechayev them in sukkah, noshim potter from sukkah? On that, Tosfos answers that Avin Hoy Boy Sanes does not apply to any mitzvah d'oraisa. It's only applicable to mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. We only find it by Hadlokas Ner Chanukah, which is d'Rabbanan, by the Kriyas HaMegillah, which is d'Rabbanan, and Dalet Kaises, which is d'Rabbanan. We don't find that you can apply the concept of Avin Hoy Boy to any mitzvah d'oraisa. According to that Tosfos, so Avin Hoy Boy Sanes wouldn't apply to B'zchiras Mechiyas Amalek as well, because it is a mitzvah d'oraisa, as we saw. So Mamela, according to the Rashbam and according to Tosfos, we can't use Avin Hoy Boy Sanes to be Mechayev Noshim in Kriyas Parshat Zohar. Besides that, I think we should utilize the concept of Shlosh Ksum Aboim Ke'echad Ein Melamdin. If Chazal wanted to be Mechayev Noshim in Kriyas Parshat Zohar, they wouldn't have relied on telling it to us only by Megillah and Dalet Kaises. Yeah, Chazal would have told it to us again over here, specifically by Kriyas Parshat Zohar. They didn't say it in one place and we should use it as a Mamatzin of HaRav. They said it in 3 places. They said it in 3 places meant these are the only 3 places where it applies. So Mamela, B'chol Oifen, that would end for the chinuch, why you hold Noshim Pot, and you don't say Avin Hoy Boy Sanes. Let's go back to the Minchas Chinuch on page Chaf Aleph over here, and let's see his 4 arguments that he has against the chinuch, why he wants to be Mechayev Noshim in this mitzvah. It says, in the box, it says, HaRav Mechaber Poiter Noshim Mitzvah. The chinuch out is Noshim from B'zchiras Mechiyas Amalek. I mean, and it also seems the Poiter is something halav kamke. It is also from the lav of like Tishkach. And it's not explained in the Rambam. Now, kasha number 1 on this: you need a proof. The pater noshim from a mitzvah say that's not zman geroma. Now, being that it's a mitzvah to meet this, not just Shabbos Parshat Zohar, that's a takonos chachomim, but the mitzvah of Zohar Shos Amalek is a constant mitzvah. It's a constant mitzvah. It's not relegated to a specific time. And therefore, Noshim should be mechuyev, like every mitzvah said, Shaloi Hazman Gerom. This is his first argument. And this kasha of his, the Binyan Sian over there in the Tshuva, which you saw before, it's on page, the Binyan Sian is on page Chav Gimel in your contrast. He also asks this kasha. And on page Chav Daled, the Yeshua Smalkar of Shula Kutter, in his Tshuva in Simon Nun, in Orachaim, he also asked this kasha that it's not Hazman Gerom. The answer to this kasha, what is the chinuch going to answer to this? Well, firstly, the chinuch says if not the nois melchama, so the whole mitzvah is not applicable to them, regardless if it's a mitzvah, say shaloi hazman geroma. But if the purpose of the mitzvah is a melchama, and if they're parted from melchama, they're parted from this. So the fact that they say shaloi hazman geroma shouldn't be mechayev. Nevertheless, there is discussion in the Achronim page Chavov in your contrast to the Tshuva and the Avnei Nezer from the Sachet Shover and Chelik Orachaim Simon Tov Kuf, where he wants to say that the mitzvah of B'zchiras Mechiyas Amalek is a mitzvah Sasei Shasman Geroma, because it's not noihig on Shabbos. You can't kill Amalek on Shabbos because that's a malacha. And Mamela, he says that constitutes a level of mitzvahs aseh man geroma because they're potter from the mitzvah. So Mamela, it is a man geroma, and that's why noshim should be. The Kli Chemda in the end of Parshas Kiseitze brings the Tzachar Shavar, this and he argues with it. He discusses. Of course, he has grace to the Herz for the Tzachar, but he wants to say that possibly the fact that on Shabbos it's a malacha to do it doesn't constitute a mitzvah man geroma. It's a technicality that you can't kill Amalek on Shabbos, but really it's not a Purim, that's a mitzvah. So it is a mitzvah. So I say shaloi has man geroma. Lamaisa, there is a chuvas Reb Kiva Eger in Siman Adura Kama Siman Kufa and Dalet, where Reb Kiva Eger says specifically that any mitzvah that you can't do on Shabbos because it's a malacha does not make the mitzvah into a mitzvah man geroma. It's merely a technicality that you can't fulfill it. And if you would be over on the Isra Shabbos and do it, it wouldn't be a mitzvah above Avera. He brings there's a Yerushalmi to that effect. So you would be like Kriya al Nesla Shabbos, even though he's over on Isra Kil Shabbos, he's Mekayim the mitzvah of Kriya. That's such a Yerushalmi. And the Mela, there's also Chuvas Reb Kiva Eger Hachadoshes. That's the Chilek Gimel of Reb Kiva Eger and Siman Yud Zayin, where he also argues that a mitzvah that you're put on Shabbos that you can't do on Shabbos does not make it into a mitzvah man geroma. And he ends off the shul by saying, "Uposhut uborur." It's simple, but that is a fact that Shabbos doesn't make it as man geroma, and it's very clear it doesn't make it as man geroma. That would answer this taina. So the taina of the Minchas Chinuch, his first taina is the tzarich raya lifter noshim yitzal say she'ein as man geroma, and on page Chafalov, that taina would be that it is according to Al-Qalpanim, according to the Avnei Mezer, it is a Zman Geroma. According to the Kiva Eger, it's not a Zman Geroma. But the Marcheshes over here in your contrast, the Marcheshes says it's anyway a Zman Geroma. Page Chav Zayin in your contrast, it's in the Chelik Aleph of the Marcheshes, Simon Chav Beis, or it's Gimel, and he says V'yesh oid lo hisev al tam ha'chinuch shekoser noshim einon b'mitzvah zechiru mechia eish einon b'nois melchama. Because of Rashi's album Megillah, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, and Maschel Ish she'ein zman milchama b'layla yishetech. B'layla, and he ends off here. V'kivan she'ein chiyuv milchama l'biyayim harei mitzvah sasei shasman geroma shenoshim b'turas mehen v'al kein einon gam kein b'mitzvah zechirim mishum she'einon b'nois milchama mishum hadis sasei shasman geroma. So he says that Laila, the Torah of Laila, that does constitute Zman Geroma. Kiva Eger actually says Laila does constitute a Torah of Zman Geroma, not like Shabbos. According to the Marchesh, it's anyway as man geroma. That also and first another teretz to the kasha. Getting back to the Minchas Chinuch here, page Chafalov in your contrast. His second point is ubefrat b'mokim lav gamke. So he says that loitishkach is a lav also, and we have a cloud. Torah says ish v'isha sheyasum ekol chatis odom ish v'akos v'ishal v'ish l'chalonchin shebetoyra. All loisas in the Torah, regardless whether it is a man geroma or it's not a man geroma, noshim are mechuyev. So Mamela Noshim would be mechuyev in the lav of like Tishkach. So Mamela, because there's a lav, so Mamela, there's a lav in the assay, it should be mechuyev in the assay as well. Well, to answer this kasha, there's a number of answers we could answer. One answer we could say is that the Gemara said before in Daf Yudches Amud Aleph from Megillah that like Tishkach is only shikchas alev. Zochar is bepeh. The reading of the kriya that you learn out Zechira from Megillah has to be Metech Aksav is from the fact that Parsha Zohar, and that only comes from the word Zohar. It doesn't come from the Tishkach. Tishkach is only Shikchas Halev, means forgetting in the heart, just to remember Amalek. So to be Mechayev Noshim with the Lisas, it would only be Mechayev them not to forget about Amalek. It's not Mechayev them to go to Shul to hear the Kriya of Parsha Zohar, because that's not Nichlal in the Lisas. Aside from that, there's another teretz I believe to this kasha. And that is, if you look in your contrast, the Gemara in Kedushin of Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph, it's page Chav Ches in your contrast. The Gemara says over there, well, first let's take a look at the place. This place says, well, let's first see the Gemara. It says, which I'm say that are not Zman Geroma. mezuzah, makeh, aveda, v'shiluach hakein. That's why noshim are mechuyev in these mitzvahs aseh, because they're not relegated to a specific time. Mezuzah is all the time, makeh is all the time, aveda is all the time, shluch hakein is all the time. So now he says, like the Gemara Esaka, Shevarei, Talmud Torah, period, Verev, Yopidin Aben, the Lav is like Shesman Gerom, Uv, Noshim Peturos. Mitzvahs over here asks a kasha, a very obvious kasha, that mitzvahs aseh of Makkah, regardless if it would be Zman Gerom or not Zman Gerom, comes with a twin loisas, loisosim domim b'beisecha. Loisosim Makkah like a gecha, but loisosim domim b'beisecha. It's a loisas. The loisas of loisosim domim b'beisecha should be mechayev you to build a makkah. So even if the mitzvahs aseh of makkah would be a zman geroma, nevertheless noshim would be mechayev. Why does the Gemara say that the reason why noshim are potter from makkah is because it's a mitzvahs aseh shelo zman geroma? It should be, the reason they're chayiv is because there's a loisas as well. So if you look at page Chavtes over here, the Ramban, and so that it also says the same teretz, that this kasha of Tosfos. They say, V'li nireh, she'ikar mitzvot sayaseh. Makeh, the main mitzvah, is not the lav of loisosim domim b'veisech. Ikar mitzvah is the mitzvah say, she'ein lav sheboy elo l'kayim aseh. The only purpose why the Torah also added the lav is to make sure that you're mekayim daseh building the makeh. Because of the Achimona first, was his makeh tchila, writes that first. And v'hodar afterwards it says loisosim domim b'veisecha kloimar loita'akev milasas mitzvah. Don't hold back from doing this mitzvah. So the loisasa only comes to be mechazek the mitzvah saseh. V'lav she'en by ma'isa achar elokiyam aseh sheboihu. It's not a separate loisasa. It's the kiyam aseh. The ilu hoya noshim b'turos mi'aseh. Noshim would have been potter aseh because it was man geroma. Or you put yourself in a lav, you would import from the lav as well. The lav doesn't have its own toikif. Whatever the asay is mechayev, the lav is just mechazik that asay. Shein a lav ela kiyam asay, the lav is only kiyam asay. Now, if this rule of the Ramban and the Ritva is correct, then we know that since in the Torah it says Zochor is Asheros L'cha Molek, and Timcha Zechra Molek, then it says Leitishkach. The Leitishkach says after the mitzvah saseh. Since the lav is after the mitzvah saseh, the Ramban and the Ritva say, in such a case, the lav does not have its own toikef to be mechayev noshim, if noshim would be potter from the mitzvah saseh. Mainly in our case, the minchas chinuch's kasha on the chinuch, why noshim are potter, if there's also a loisaseh, that's his taina. So the answer to this is very simple. The loisase, according to the Ramban and the Ritva, only are mechazik asay, and if noshim would be potter from the asay, you can't be mechayiv them in the loisase. So the second argument of the minchas chinuch to be mechayiv noshim in Kiyus Pasha Zochor is answered both because the loisase is not mechayiv the kri, it's only mechayiv the zechir in your mind, chichas alev, and secondly because according to the Ramban and the Ritva, the loisase would not be mechayev noshim if they would be potter from the mitzvah saseh. It's only mechazik aseh, and if they're potter from aseh for whatever reason, the loisase cannot be mechayev them. The third argument of the minchas is mashakosav kilohem lasos hamelchama v'lein noshim. The noshim lav nois melchama ninu. He says be'emes melchemes mitzvah kol yotzma v'lekalam yichuposa k'mavur b'shach soitam and daled u'medbeis u'baram kan perek zayin alocha daled, which we have here in the booklet. We have the Rambam at Noshim because it says Lekalam Echupos. Now the emes is there's a steer in the Rambam because in Hilchos Avodah Zorah the Rambam says in Perek Yud Beis Halacha Yud, we don't have it in the booklet. The Rambam over there says that if a isha goes out with an instrument of war, she's over the loisase of Layek Ligever Alisha. She's over the loisase. Now if Noshim would be mechuyev even in Melchemes Mitzvah, you couldn't make instruments of war specifically only a kligever. If sometimes noshim are benois melchama, then they can't be over the lav of lo yeh kligever alisha because it's not a kligever anymore. It's sometimes used for men, sometimes used for women. So from that seems to be a steer in the Rambam, and it seems to be a problem in the steer sasugyas because the Gemara says noshim la benois melchama ninhu because of Yeshua, and it also says. The Gemara over there in in Pesachya Aleph in Nazir, it says that they go out with Kli Milchama over Yekli Gevra Alisha. What do we do with this Mishnah that says Aflakala Michupasa and Noshman? Now the emes is there is a moira de keteres that is kasha, but it seems that the Achronim, including Mariel Peskin, and a lot of the Achronim, didn't have the Radbaz's Pirish on the Rambam. In most standard Rambams, where it has the Radbaz's Pirish on the side of the Rambam, it says over there, Radbaz Ksav Yad. I have an old Rambam where they didn't even put it in there yet. The Rambams of a couple of hundred years ago didn't have it. Mariel Peskin didn't have it, and I have proof that the Achronim didn't have it. Because if you look here in Page Lamed Vov, which we have the Rambam in Perek Zayin Halacha Dalet of Hilchos Malachim, right? Perek Zayin Halacha Dalet, where the Rambam says that Kala Mechupos and Noshim are mechuyev to go to Milchama. The Radbaz on the side says Elo Bekosher. Chiderech Hanoshim Lasses Milchama. They call it Kala Mechupos. What it says called Kavod Bas Melech Benima. Called Kavod Bas Melech Benima that they're put from Milchama. So he says two answers to this question. They don't go to Milchama. Kala Mechupos means Kivon the Chosim Yotzei Mechedroi. Rav Shlomo mentioned this earlier. This teretz. Even the Chosim Yotzei Mechedroi Kala Yotzei Mechuposa Sheina Nehegas Yemei Chuppah. Kala Mechuposa means that the power of Melchemes Mitzvah can drive a Kala out of her Chuppah. At that great moment in her life when she wants to be by the Chuppah, the Melchemes Mitzvah can take her out of there. It doesn't send her to war. It just means that since the Chosim is mechuyev to go to Melchemes Mitzvah, the Kala can't go to Chuppah anymore. Second teretz he says is ve'efsher the Melchemes Mitzvah hanoshim hoyo mitzafos mayim u'mozon lebaleim. Rav Shlomo mentioned this earlier as well. That in Melchemes Mitzvah, noshim were supplying water and food for their husbands. V'chein haminik hayoim b'ivrios, ba'arvios. That's the minik today amongst the Arabs, that the Arab women bring food and drink to their husbands when they're at war again. So Mamela, both of these terutzim, the Radva says, and in neither, according to neither teretz, is there a mitzvah for to go to war. This for him is the Stiras Rambam Mamela, that a kli gave her an instrument of war she shouldn't be wearing because she never has a mitzvah to go to war, to do war herself. And Mamela, she's part of a period of Rebbe because of a chivshua as well. That would find for the Stiras Rambam, the Stiras Sukkos in Shas, according to this. Now you look in the Ben Yohayod on page Lamed Zayin. He answered, that's how he answers it, which is included in the Radbaz here, actually. And if you look on page Lamed Ches, the Rashash in the bottom says, Kala Mechuposa means that the Chiv only means to cook and bake, which is also included in what the Radbaz says. In page Lamed Tes, the Masal HaMelech divides in the Rav in his monumental sefer on Kodshim in Hilchos Pesachya also says a teretz to this kasha. Teretz to the kasha is that it's the loisa. He says like this: "Ein mitzvah say the loisa say nog benoshim dein ruin lemelcham." Melchemes mitzvah b'minchas chinuch hisegolov. The melchemes mitzvah who hisegam benoshim kedam binu b'mishneh daf lekala michupos yoytza. Ach di matche kos v'rabeinu b'perikeim melochem. Chosan mechedroi, the Kala Mechuposa, named Poisif Chosan mechedroi, like a Tony b'Mishnah. He adds that which doesn't say in the Mishnah, and his intention is to tell you that Bal Yadei Zegam Kala takes a Mechuposa. To tell you that the Kala also has to go out Mechuposa. Again, this teretz also says in the Radbaz. And on page Mem, the Kerem Neta also says the same teretz. Mohammed Safel Chosan mechedroi, the Kala Mechuposa, and the Kala Hoylechas Rak, Babur Chosan, the Hoisha Ein Dark Lichboish. All both terutzim in Radbaz are used by the Achronim because they didn't have the Pirush Radbaz on the Rambam. It was a recent addition to the Rambam, so it was not the Nimtza. Had they known this, they wouldn't have had to say it. They would have said that Radbaz said so. And Mamela, the Mariel Diskin and the Minchas Chinuch also, if they had seen the Radbaz, they wouldn't have asked this kasha on the Sefer HaChinuch because Kala Mechuposa does not mean that they actually go to war. As is Mukhrach from the Stiras Rambam, the Stiras Sugyas, and from the Radbaz's Pirish on the Rambam. there are steers actually in the Minchas Chinuch, in the Chinuch, the Sefer Chinuch himself. Mitzvah Tofresh Gimel over here, going back to the Minchas Chinuch, the Chinuch writes that Noshim, Lishitosa in the next mitzvah, it's the same page, Mitzvah Tofresh Dalet, which is Mitzvah Lahachriz Harish Amalek, to destroy Amalek, he ends off, Al Kol Yochid Yisrael Hazchorim Mut Lachid Lahordim Alav B'Minoy. There's no mitzvah for the ladies to do it, even though it is a mitzvah, even though it's a Melchemes mitzvah Amalek, nevertheless, the Chinuch Patus Noshim as well. And as we explained before, according to the Rambam, and we saw in Radbas, that's a good reason why he Patus it. There's a little bit of a problem with this, because there are other mitzvahs that deal with Milchama. Mitzvah Tov Kuf Chav Hey in the Chinuch, it says, the mitzvah is not to be scared off by the enemy in war. And he says, it's only like Israel, not for the games. Also, mitzvah Tov Kuf Chavav, he ends off, that mitzvah of Tov Kuf Chavav is also mitzvah l'mitshoyach koyan l'melchama. He says, when mitzvah b'schorim b'zman she'eretz Yisrael b'yeshuva. Mitzvah Tov Kuf Chav Zayin is mitzvah lasses b'melchemes horishus k'mishpat hakosov. And on that mitzvah, the Chinuch ends off, when mitzvah b'zman she'eretz Yisrael b'schorim she'heim ru'im l'melchama. All of those, he says, is only noyeg wherever there's a mitzvah of melchama. The Chinuch writes that noshim are potter. Which kind of mitzvah that deals with melchama, noshim are potter, including melchemes Amalek, which is melchemes mitzvah. The only problem is that there is a stira in the Chinuch itself by the mitzvah of harigas shiva amamin. The page lamed beis in your contrast, which is the mitzvah, the Chinuch mitzvah of chav hey. There's a mitzvah larig shiva amamin hamavzikim ba'artzeinu terem kibashnu eisot mehem. The mitzvah to destroy the Shiva Amamin, which were the nations that had inhabited Eretz Yisrael before Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael. And here he ends off on page Lamed Gimel in your compass, all the way at the end, near the end of the mitzvah. It's underlined from the Heges mitzvah b'schorim onik evois. So here we find where the Chinuch changes course, and he is mechayev noshim as well. In the mitzvah of harigas shiva amamin, we have to understand why. If noshim were potter from all milchama, what happened to harigas shiva amamin? Now, Shlomo mentioned before that he saw the Zecher Simcha over here, that Simcha Bamberger. I'll introduce you to him. He was a Rav in Germany. He was the brother to the Binyan Tzian's son-in-law, and he's the bar plukt of the Binyan Tzian. The Tshuva of the Binyan Tzian, where he's arguing that noshim should be mechuyev in B'zchiras Mechias HaMolek, he is the rebuttal to the Zecher Simchas Chiyuv that Noshim are potter from Kriyas Parsha Zohar and Milchemes HaMolek. What does he suggest as a solution? He has a tremendous solution to the problem. What he says is as follows. The reason why Noshim are potter from Milchama is called Kavut Bas Melech Penima, like we saw before quoted. That's the reason why they're potter. He says that mitzvah of Kol Kavut Bas Melech Penima only began when Yisrael war b'Yeshuvam. When Yisrael war in Eretz Yisrael, then they became a Penima. While they were in the Midbar in conquering Eretz Yisrael, they were out in the open. There was no din of Kol Kavut Bas Melech Penima, and Mamela conquering Eretz Yisrael means killing the Shiva Amamin doesn't have the Petur of Kol Kavut Bas Melech Penima, and that's why the Chinuch is Mechayev. That's his tremendous solution. I have a raya to him that he's right. Because if you look in page Lamed Aleph, where the Mishnah says, "V'melchemes mitzvah hakol yotzma v'lochosim mechedra v'kala mechuposa," right? Page Lamed Aleph. Rashi says over there, "Kegoin kibush Eretz Yisrael b'mei Yehoshua hakol yotzim." Conquer Eretz Yisrael in the days of Yeshua, everybody goes out, including the ladies. Now, you would wonder if Melchemes mitzvah hakol yotzim, Rashi was written after Kibush Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah also was written after Kibush Eretz Yisrael. Don't you think Rashi would give you an example of something that's noig b'zman hazeh? Rashi couldn't find anything more that's noig b'zman hazeh. The only time the Melchemes mitzvah that Kalam Nichupasa actually goes out to wage war, according to the Chinuch, and according to Rashi here, is Kibush Eretz Yisrael B'Vei Yoishu HaKol Yitz. There was no din of Kol Kavud Bas Malach Panim at that point, because the Yidden were still in the Midbar. Also, if you look carefully in the Lashonos of the Chinuch, page Lamed in your contrast, which is Mitzvah Tov Kuf Chav Hey, again, this will be Scham Kilahem Li'Lachem Bizman She'Yisrael Al Admosan. Only Bizman She'Yisrael Al Admosan, then Noshim are potter, only Zechorim. Why did the Chinuch add these words, Bizman She'Yisrael Al Admosan? Because that's when the Petur of Kol Kavud Bas Malach Panima begins. When they were conquering Eretz Yisrael, killing the Shiva Amanim, at that point in time, there is no Petur of Kol Kavud Bas Malach Panima. That's why Noshim would be Mechuyev. Mamela now, Kriyas Pasha Zohar, once Yisrael Al Admosan, there's no more Kibush of Eretz Yisrael of Shiva Amanim. Noshim were potter from the Melchama. Mamela, they're potter also from the mitzvah of Zechira of Kriyas Pasha Zohar. Getting back to the Minchas Chinuch, the fourth argument of the Minchas Chinuch against the Chinuch is, on page Chafalov, he says, Gam mi omad b'soid Hashem Yisborach, who stood there in the secrets of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and matam machmas anakam. The reason of Zchiras HaMolek is to take revenge from HaMolek and kill HaMolek. We don't know what the reason is. But could be it's not intertwined together with the mitzvah Melchemes. Even though we're potter from Melchama, maybe they still be Melchim Kriyas Pasha Zohar. That's what he wants to say. It'll be a continuous mitzvah to remember not to forget. Why you part of them? And the Chinuch goes out of Gidroi over here a little bit. Normally he discusses the Sefer HaChinuch and has some kashas on him. He's never really actually choilek on the Chinuch. Here he says, "V'nira the kol isha Yisrael chayovim k'moi kol mitzvah she'ein hazman geroma kei nira." All women are mechuyev in the mitzvah of Zechira of Kriyas Parshas Zohar and Shabbos, just like they're mechuyev in every mitzvah she'ein hazman geroma v'kei nira. So here he paskins fakert from the Sefer HaChinuch. Now he says, "Gami omad b'sayid Hashem," that one is totally in the other. Firstly, I would like to say that the Chinuch probably could have thought, number one, if you recall the places that we had in Kedushin Daf Lamed Daled, that's underlined, the places in Kedushin Daf Lamed Daled which you had in your Kuntres on page, let's see, on page Chav Ches, Tosfos says, Pirya v'Riv Yanoshim are potter, right? Tosfos says, why are they potter? Because it says in the same posuk v'chiv shuha. Ru'avu u'milu asratz v'chiv shuha. So if they're potter from v'chiv shuha, because Allah b'nois milchama, they're memela potter on Pirya v'Riv. Even though we might seem to think that there's no correlation between the mitzvah of Pirya v'Riv and the mitzvah of conquering the land, nevertheless, since they're in the very same posuk, the Gemara makes a gzeira shava that they're potter from Pirya v'Rivya because the posuk has v'chiv shuha on the same posuk. Now, even if we were to say that remembering Amalek, which I would think is more of a correlation to remember the hatred to Amalek, to the waging war against Amalek, is more connected than the mitzvah Pirya v'Rivya and v'chiv shuha and waging war, but it is in the same posuk. Even if the Chinuch is correct, that the reason of the sinner is not totally in the Melchama, but it's still in the same posuk. And if they're potter from the Melchama, they should also be potter from the Zechira, just like they're potter from Pirya v'Rivya because they're potter from the V'chiv shuha. That's number one. Number two, he asked me, Omad b'soid Hashem, that's the reason, that's his kasha. Who told the Chinuch that that's the connection? Now, Lamaisa, if we look around, we'll see that there was many Rishonim that were Omad b'soid Hashem, and they knew that that's the reason. The Ramban, in the end of Parshas Kiseitze, you take a look in your Kuntres, near the end of the Kuntres, page Mem Aleph of your Kuntres. Ramban on the bottom of the page says, I don't know what is the purpose? A few pages back, page Mem Aleph. By you, it's probably page 42. You number the pages. It says over there, I don't know what it's about. Says the Ramban, don't forget what he did in order till you destroy him from under the heavens. So part of Zechirus Mechiyas Amalek is actually to tell us that Ramban was also made beside Hashem. You look on top of the very same page, you see here the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvah, Mitzvah Kuf Pei Tes, he says, He should tzivonu liskor ma she'osalonu Amalek, v'lisno yisrei b'choleis v'eis, v'no'oyer ha'nefoshet b'ma'amorim l'hilachem boi. The purpose of being mo'oyer, the hatred of Amalek, is that we should wage war against Amalek. So it seems, and B'hu Amroi Yisala Zocher Sashros Amalek, and he quotes the Bryce over there. So Mamela, the Rambam also was going to decide Hashem that the reason for this Zechira is to wage war against Amalek. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim in Perikei Halacha Hey also says that it's the Zechira is in order to loiter a vosai, and Rambam Chitosa means loiter a vosai in order to lachim boy. The same we find in the Smag over here in Mitzvah Sekuf Tezayin. He says also that Mitzvah say just like Mitzvah say in order that we should hate him and make wage war against him. So Bekitzer, we already have here the Chinuch, we have the Ramban, and we have the Smag. Besides that, the Sefer HaChinuch lists off the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek and Milchemes Amalek, a separate mitzvahs, as you saw in Tofresh Gimel and Tofresh Dalet. The same way, the Smag lists off 3 separate mitzvahs, and the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs lists off 3 separate mitzvahs. But the Rasag, Rabbeinu Sadia Goin, and the Yereim, and the Bahag, the Balachas Gedolis, only list 1 mitzvah, and that mitzvah is waging war against Amalek. There's no mention there is a separate mitzvah of Zechiras Mechiyas Amalek and the Leitishkach. There's no mention of that. It's all 1 mitzvah. So Rabbeinu Yerucham official parallel, the Mefarish under Rasag, explains what's the cheshbon, why these Rishonim don't list 3 separate mitzvahs. And he says that they consider the Zechira and the Leitishkach, the Aseh and the Loisaseh, as a sniff. It's only a branch. It's to the main mitzvah of Milchom against Amalek. So it's not a separate mitzvah. And the sheet of the Rasag and the Yereim and the Bahag is that a mitzvah that's only a sniff to another mitzvah doesn't constitute a separate mitzvah in the cheshbon of the Taryag mitzvahs. And that's why they don't list it in the cheshbon of the Taryag mitzvahs. So according to the Yereim and the Bahag and the Rasag, obviously, the purpose of Zechiras Mechiyas Amalek, Zechira, Pasha Zohar, is the Milchama. That's obviously they're very, very much aimed beside Hashem, that there's no other reason for the mitzvah of Zechira except the wage war against Amalek. So Mamela, if Nashim are part from the Milchama, they're obviously going to be partner from this as well. So this would answer his other kasha about the Nashim. Besides that, there is, on page Aleph that you saw over here, there is the Smak, Sefer Mitzvah's Kotzer, who says the mitzvah of Gimel is Shaloi Lishkoyach Maisa Amalek, not to forget the Maisa Amalek. Yeah, and he says the Chesed was like Tishkach. Pirish. What is the meaning of the mitzvah? This is something entirely new which we didn't have till now. It says Pirish Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yitilonu Miyoda. Hakadosh Baruch Hu saved us from Amalek in the war. Because of that, the year of HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be on our face, that we should never sin. And with this, if we don't ever do Averis, and we do Tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us the power to take revenge from Amalek, Omein Selah. So we find in Smak also Rishon, different approach completely to what the mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek is. So that which the Minchas Chinuch writes at Noshim should be Mechuyev and Zohar, because maybe it has nothing to do with the Milchama. Well, here is a new concept that the Smak offers us, that there is something else about Zechiras Mechiyas Amalek besides waging war against him. Remember what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, that we shouldn't sin. Now, what does it mean that we shouldn't sin? How does that happen over here? Where do you see that in the Zohar? So the Haredim over here on the top of the page on the left side, he says there's Perik Samach is his mitzvah not to be lazy in performing any one of the mitzvahs. So he says, person has to shake off the clothing of laziness, and so on and so forth. And he goes on and on and on, and he says that the reason why the mitzvah of Zohar is sandwiched in between the lav of Mishkolos, not to have false weights, and the next mitzvah of the beginning of the next parasha, Parashas Kisavoy, of Bikurim is because these seem to be mitzvahs that are not very meaningful to some people, and they think if the weight is a little bit off, it's not the end of the world. Or they say, what do I have to schlep all the way from Beersheba to Yerushalayim with my Bikurim? For one apple, I can give it to a kohen that's Be'iri, and it shouldn't be a problem. So it's sandwiched in the middle, and he says a very interesting thing. He says that every time a person is faced with a mitzvah saseh or a mitzvah loy saseh, he should remember Amalek, because it says Vayilochem and Yisrael birfidim. Amalek only came because Yidden were rofu yedeim and atorah min mitzvahs. Yidden said Hayesh Hashem b'kerbeinu imoyin. They were rofu in Amunah Hashem, and they were rofu from kiyam Torah mitzvahs. That's why Vayov Amalek came. So Mamela, it seems that the purpose of remembering Amalek is to remember every time you do a mitzvah, remember Amalek. And interestingly, there is another Yereim, which is not here in the booklet, where the Yereim writes that the minig was in Castilla and a lot of places today also, he says, he brings us for the Mari de Leon, that when every Kaddish, before Omen Yeheshmei Rabba, everybody said, he says, Kiyod al Keis Kom, Ulchom al Hashem Amalek Nitor Doer, Omen Yeheshmei Rabba Vorach Lolam Olam Yomayim. Because as long as Amalek exists in the world, Ein Hashem Sholem, Ein Hakisei Sholem, Ad Sheimoch Hazaret Shel Amalek. So every Omen Yeheshmei Rabba is to remember the mitzvah of Mchias Amalek. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shem is not Sholem, and his Kisei is not Sholem. Case is missing the Aleph, and Ko is missing the Vav and the Hey, till Yemoch Hazaret Shel Amalek. So every Kaddish, you have to remember that. Now there's a Mogen Avram in Hilchos Kriyishma, where he says when you say Bekerav Tonom Alkeinu the Shimcha Godol, when you say Kriyishma, it means he should bring us closer to Mechias Amalek when the Shem will become Sholem, because the Shimcha Godol, when the Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes great again. So you should have that in mind. Mechias Amalek every morning when you say Birchas Kriyishma, before every mitzvah say, every mitzvah lo yisaseh, there's a mitzvah say of remembering Amalek. So this is a new concept which has nothing to do with the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Mamela could be the Minchas Chinuch is right. Even though Noshim are potter from maybe the milchama against Amalek, and remembering to hate Amalek, but they should remember what about the milchemes Amalek that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Amalek on us when we were over min HaTorah min HaMitzvahs. I can turn to page Membez in your countries. See a psikta Rabbosi that says, "Have a zechurim loy." You should remember Amalek lim choyse shema in order to wipe out his name in oil of the world. Zochoyes hashros Amalek lim chesech Amalek. So here he says what the 7 Rishonim hold that the purpose of Zechiras Mechias Amalek is in order to destroy Amalek. And if you look over here in page Mem Hey, you have the Rabbeinu Bechaya says Nismach Parshas Amalek Lametach Shekartam B'Midos Havidoig Mikiro Yoyev Shenem Amoisnei Mir Matei Avas Hashem Osibasrei Bozoden Vayavoy Kolim. So again, he seems to say the same concept. It is also a Rishon, same like the Smak and the Karedim. And if you look on page Memvov, you have here the Medrash Tanchuma, which is already going into a Moiroim. So it says, Lo yel locha bekis choyev nu oven lo yel locha beveisecha matam kishoyev es Hashem aksiv achrav zochit rashos locha Amalek. So it says already in the Medrash Tanchuma, this concept that says in the Rabbeinu Bechaya and in the Smak and in the Sefer Charedim. And over here in page Memzayin, he says, Kol zman shoy hamelech mevakesh la'asker chet shel benoi. He brings here a medrash. Obviously, it's a medrash that there was a melech that had a pardes, and he wanted to make sure that nobody steals from the pardes. So he put a big dog to guard the pardes. And the son of one of his sorim went in and he tried to steal from the fruits of the pardes, and the dog bit him. So the king was aware of that. So he wanted to remind him what he did. It's called that he broke into the fence. He says to him, you remember the dog bit you? Without telling him, remember you stole? He doesn't want to remind him that you did an Avera, but he did it in a roundabout way that he should remember. Every time you remember what Amalek did, you remember, Amalek only came because he were Rafi Dim and Torah Nemesis. So he says both things, both Rishonim. So Lamaisa, we don't have to say that it's a Machlokes or Rishonim, because we find that the Pesachya Rabbosi, both things, and in page Nun in the Pesachya Rabbosi, which is really the same thing you find in the Pesachya Rebbe Eliezer, which was a Tana Rebbe Eliezer HaGodol. It's page Nun in your contrast. It says over here, it's a pasuk in Iyov, Zichronechem, your Zichronos. Medaber connected Yisrael, Shomalem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani Mitzav Lakem Shetiu Maskim Shnayim Zichronos. I command you to remember two things that you have to remember. So the Pirish Marzu over here says, but really it's a Beferish Yalkut. He quotes it from the Yalkut, but it's also in the Pesachya Rebbe Eliezer, which is Tanoim say this. Timcha Zecher Amalek Soy Parshas Teitzei, Ki Mochoi Emcha Zecher Amalek Soy Parshas B'Shalach. So the two times it's Zikoron, yeah. So it's Zikoron. There's two Zichronos to remember. One is Parshas Zocher at the end of Kiseitzei, which they named the Shabbos. The other is Parshas Vayovay Amalek at the end of Purim morning. Also a mitzvah Shnayim Zichronos. So the one in Soy Parshas Kiseitzei is to remind you to wage war against Amalek. One that's in Parshas B'Shalach, Vayovay Amalek, is to remind you that Amalek comes when Rafa Yisrael na Torah and mitzvahs. So Mamela, there's two Zichronos. So it comes out there's no really machlokes in the Rishonim. There's two things to remember. Now, Lemaisa, there is a big machlok. Well, the Mogen Avram, actually, the Trumas Hadeshen says, which you saw before that the Mogen Avram quotes him in Trumas Hadeshen in Kufches. The Trumas Hadeshen says that people that live out in the villages and they can't come into the city only one time, either Shabbos Parshas Zocher or on Purim for the Megillah, they should come on Shabbos Parshas Zocher. And the Mogen Avram argues with the Trumas Hadeshen and says, no, they should come on Purim. And what's with Zechiras Mechias Amalek? They don't have to hear it on Shabbos Parshas Zocher. They should be Yoitzu with Vayovay Amalek on Purim morning. And of course, you have all the Mara Mekaymitz over here. In short, I'll just tell you who holds what. The Mishnah Brura says he has a kasha on the Mogen Avram, and he says that in Soy Parshas Kiseitzei in Zochar, there it says about the Milchama with Amalek, in the mitzvah of fighting off Amalek. In the end of B'Shalach, in Vayovay Amalek, even though it records that there was a war with Amalek, there's no tzivui over there of fighting with Amalek. So you can't be Yoitze, says the Mishnah Brura with that. Now there's 5 Achroinim, this Nabim, the Signon Echod, that say the very same thing as the Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura over here, first of all, the Trumas Hadeshen also says that you have to come Shabbos, Parshas Zocher, you can't be Yoitze with Purim. And also, the Aruch HaShulchan also says the same argument as the Mishnah Brura. The Aruch HaSapoisim and Siman Reishei and Orach Chaim says the same argument. And the Soder's Tshuva in Chelik Orach Chaim Siman Hei also says the same argument. And the Pul HaSocher, which is a Ben Doiroi of the Gero, and Pirish on the Ma'aser Rav of the Gero and Siman Kuf Lamed Gimel, he also says, or Kuf Lamed Zayin, he also says that you can't be Yoitze with the Kriya of Vayovay Amalek. It's Afke Parshas Zocher, where it says the mitzvah of Timcha Zecher Amalek. The Ma'aser, aside from these, there are a lot of poskim that are maskim with the Mogen Avram. Page Yud, you have the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says that he paskins like the Yoitze with Vayovay Amalek, like the Mogen Avram, and the Chai Odom also says so. And you have the Chai Odom here on page Yud Aleph where it says so, but the fellow on the bottom who's supposed to write the Piskei Mishnah Brura, where he argues in the Chai Odom, forgot to write in this that the Mishnah Brura disagrees with Chai Odom over here, because the Chai Odom passes like Mogen Avram, and the Mishnah Brura has problems with that. The Chuvas Chasam Sofer in Omid Yud Beis in your Kuntras, where he says about the Yud Beis Chodesh, the Shikha situation, if it's divided in 3 years, you don't have Ayovoy Amalek and Zohar in the middle year. So you see from him that you are Yoitzu with Ayovoy Amalek as well. But Shloime Kluger in Hagos Mechach Shloime Shloime also passing like Mogen Avram, the Machzor Shekel passing like Mogen Avram, Shari Efraim passing like Mogen Avram, the Rachel Eshkol passing like Mogen Avram, Ibn Chesel Ozer passing like Mogen Avram, the Yom Tov passing like Mogen Avram, the Yochel passing like Mogen Avram, the Avchaim passing like Mogen Avram. There's many more that paskin like the Mogen Avram than that agree with the Mishnah Berurah's argument on him. And Mamela L'choira, we have a machloikes hapoiskim. Somebody comes to you with a shaila and says, I live out in a village, I can only come once to shul, either Purim or Shabbos Parshas Zohar. Which one should I come? Well, you would have to say it's a machloikes hapoiskim, but since it's a sofik b'raisa, you would have to say that sofik b'raisa l'chumra, that you can't be yoitzu with Vayovoy Amalek. That's what you would have to tell them. That's one thing, especially if Moron Sarah Teure, Rabban Shal Kol B'nei Hagoyla, Hagoyin Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita told me that Chazon Ish told him that where there's a machlokas a poiskim, regardless if Roiv poiskim say one way, if the Mishnah Berurah is machriya the other way, the halach is always like the Mishnah Berurah. So in this case, Mishnah Berurah is machmer. You would have to be machmer, and you'd have to say that you have to go Shabbos Parshas Zohar to hear it, the Daraisa from Zohar, and not rely on the Mogen Avram to hear it Vayovoy Amalek. However, we should really say that reading it from Mitoch HaKsav, according to all the poskim, is not the Daraisa. The Zohar Bepeh, saying the words, the Takonas Chachomim of reading it Mitoch HaKsav, that's only a Takonas Chachomim of the way to fulfill the mitzvah says the Daraisa of Zohar Yeshua Amalek. But really, Midoraisa Yoitze with just saying it Bepeh. So now reading it Mitoch HaKsav is only the Rabbanon, which should say something the Rabbanon lehokel, and you should not have to go Shabbos. You can be Yoitze with Vayovoy Amalek and rely on the Mogen Avram because it's a machlikus in the Rabbanon, on which kriya you're mechuyev to hear. Lamaisa, I brought you over here a Tshuvas HaRashba on the Rambam Sofik Korah Kriya Shema. The reason I brought it to you was because the Rambam paskins that where you have a Sofik, if you were Yoitze Kriya Shema, you have to read it over with the brachas. And the kasha that the Rishonim all ask on the Rambam is that Birchas Kriya Shema is only the Rabbanon. So why can't you just say the Kriya Shema itself and leave out the brachas? And the brachas is something the Rabbanon will okay. So the Tshuvas HaRashba that the Kesef Mishnah brings over here, Tshuvas HaRashba says very clearly in Siman Shin Chof, he says that when the Rabbanon were misaken the oifen of the Kiyum mitzvah doiraisa, the part that Rabbanon added to the oifen akiyum mitzvah doiraisa has the status of a mitzvah doiraisa, and in a sofik you have to go lahachmir. So being that Rabbanon were misaken Kriya Shema together with the brachas, it's not just a birchas ha-mitzvahs, like every other bracha on a mitzvah where the bracha is not integral part of the kiyum ha-mitzvah. So there it's only a Rabbanon. But by birchas Kriya Shema, the oifen ha-kriya of Shema is in birchaseh, and therefore when you're sofik on the Kriya Shema, you're mechuyev to read it with the brachas as well. The same way we should have to say here as well that oifen the kiyum ha-mitzvah of Zohar the Doiraisa was with the kriya mitoch ha-sefer. That's the oifen of where mekayim the Doiraisa Parsha Zohar. So we have a sofik in if you're yoitze with Vayovoy Amalek, or you have to hear it from Parsha Zohar. We should have to be machmer according to this Tshuvas HaRashba as well, and we should have to say that you have to also. However, what I want to propose is as follows: being that we do have many poskim are maskim with the Mogen Avram, and like Reb Shlomo said, mekane shavek machan Mogen Avram. A lot of poskim hold with him, prima godim from the greats of poskim, and Mamela is a zon. Being that most achroinim hold that noshim are potter from tchias miyazamol. Why is that? I'll tell you what I think is the reason. Besides all the answers to their arguments of those that are mechayev noshim tchias parshas zohar, you also have to keep in mind that there's only one rishon that's been discovered till today that addresses the subject directly, and that's the chinuch. The chinuch says that they're potter. So a rishon can nishta vekmachen. There's no other rishon that says beferish that noshim are mechuyev here parshas zohar. Mamela, we have to listen to the chinuch, number one. Number two, being that we just saw that there's two reasons for mechias Amalek, for zechiras mechias Amalek, to remember to read Parsha Zohar. One is to remember to hold Milchama. The other is to remember that when Yidden do Averis, Amalek comes. Now, even though Noshim are potter from Milchama, but they are mechuyev doing mitzvahs HaTorah. So that other din that the Smak says, and that we saw in the Sefer Charedim, and that we saw in the Pesachya of Kahana, and in the Pesachya of Eliezer, and in the Alkut, that the Torah says, remember Amalek, because if you don't do, if you refuse them, Amalek will come. So that mitzvah is yeshayich to noshim. But being that mitzvah says in the other Zichrei Nechem, that one says in Vayovay Amalek, because that's where it says Vayilochem Yisrael Berfidim. That's where Yidden said Hashem Bekabeinu Moyen, and that's when Amalek came. So really, noshim should be more mechuyev in the kriya of Vayovay Amalek than they are in the kriya of Zoches Ashos Amalek and Pesachya Amalek. What I'm suggesting is like this: even if for a man we were to go lechumra and say he must come Shabbat Parshas Zochar and not rely on the Magen Avraham, but ladies, for sure, can rely ruiger hate on the Magen Avraham, because there in Parshas Vayovoy Amalek, at the end of Parshas Beshalach, that's where the Iker mitzvah that shaykh to Noshim, that's where it says that mitzvah. Now, what was the custom in Europe? I'll just tell you. Somebody once asked Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach if his wife has to go Shabbos to hear Parshas Zochar. He said to him, she should ask her mother what her mother used to do. And then he said, it's hard for her, she could stay home also. It doesn't matter. Now, the minig was in Poland, the Avnei Nezer Orach Chaim Siman Tov Kuf Tes, says that Noshim are potter. The Torah's Chesed the Lublin and Orach Chaim Siman Lamed Zayin is loichem a milchama against ladies going to Parshas Zochar. He holds it's a priestess. The Minchas Elazar goes to task with him over it, because he seems to say that the ladies would come into the men's shul when they learn Parshas Zochar. And to carry a Sefer Torah into the Ezras Noshim playing Parshas Zochar is not proper either. It's better that Noshim should not go. And he holds that the minig was that Noshim never went to hear Parshas Zochar. And by changing that, he seems to say that you are infringing on the Metzora that Noshim were potter. You're over al titash Torah simecha by changing our Metzora and making ladies go to Parshas Zochar. He was a Polish Godel, and it seems he says in Poland ladies did not go to hear Parshas Zochar. Also, we find in the Shula Kutner, which we saw before in Orach Chaim Simanon, also says Noshim are potter. The Glichemda from Erdan Plotsky in Sleit Parshas Yisrael also says Noshim are potter. These are all places to Gedolim. They all potted Noshim from going to here. The Litter, the Marcheshes, was in Vilna. The Marcheshes says in Galop Simon Chov Beis that it's a Zman Garoma and Noshim are potted from it as well. And the Shila Shmuel from the Tanat Tosfos, Simon Zayin, also says like the Chinuch that Noshim are potted. So these were two literature Gedolim. Now in Galicia, Remeir Arik, the Minchas Kanois and Soitat of Memdalan on the Beis says that Noshim are potted. That's already a Galatianer Godel. And the Divrei Chaim, which you have in your Kuntras, you're probably wondering why I put it in there. The reason why I put the Divrei Chaim in your Kuntras is after the Minchas Chinuch, it's on page Chof Beis, it's a one-liner. The shaila in the Divrei Chaim was they knocked down the shul and they were rebuilding the shul, and there was a discussion about making the Viber shul, the Ezras Noshim, bigger, using partially some of the area that previously was the Ezras Anoshim, and making it into an Ezras Noshim. So he says over there, there's a halacha of ein moedim lektusha chamura lektusha kala. Not allowed to bring down something for greater kedusha to a lesser kedusha. Now, the Ezras Noshim, he says, has less mitzvahs being performed in it than in the Ezras Anoshim. Therefore, the Divrei Chaim says, he lists off and says you cannot take away part of the men's shul and make it into the Ezras Noshim. When he lists off the mitzvahs that men are mekayim and ladies are not mekayim, he says, "Ukriyas arba parshias men are mekayim in the men's shul, arba parshias noshim peturos." Now, if you know, Parshas Zochar is one of the Dalet Parshas. Now, the Divrei Chaim was a brother-in-law to the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch was the loichem, and Noshim should go to Parshas Zochar, and the Divrei Chaim, his brother-in-law, argued with him, and the Divrei Chaim was a grosser goin, a grosser poisik. He was from the Gresta Admoirim that ever lived, and in Galicia, especially by Chassidim, his word was quite chadoshim. So the Galicianer ladies did not go, and it sounds reineklich, for sure the ladies did not go to hear Parshas Zochar because the Divrei Chaim said no, that they don't go. Aside from that, amongst the Sephardish Gedolim, we also find a discussion. The Mata Yehuda from the Mari Ayash, in Orach Chaim Simon Reish Pei Beis Yivkot Zayin, he says that noshim are potter. I'm going to your Parsha Zohar. The Mishkanos HaRoyim brings from the Cheknos, and also Sfardische say noshim are potter. The Rabbi Yehuda Najjar, Sfardische Gold in Limud Hashem, Limud Kuf Mem Dalet says noshim are potter also. And the Kaf HaChaim is also Sfardish and Sim Tofresh Beis. Cotton Lamed brings B'Shem the Limud Hashem that noshim are potter. So it seems also, even though the Binyan Sin was in Germany, and he is one of those proponents of yes Mechayim Nocher in Parsha Zohar, but if you read the Tshuva carefully, you'll see he says he had it the Kabbalah from his Rebbe Rav Avram Bing, had it the Kabbalah from his Rebbe from Rav Nosson Adler that it should go. Now he had to have this Kabbalah from Rav Nosson Adler. Rav Nosson Adler was a very original Godel. He didn't follow him in Hoge Frankfurt, as is commonly known. He made his own Besmedrish, he had his own Nusach, he didn't follow them in Hogim of Frankfurt. So from the fact that the Binyan Sian quotes him as the source for them being Mechuyev, it seems that in Frankfurt and Germany they did not know either. Besides the fact that the Zeicher Simcha was a Rav, Reb Simcha Bamberger was a Rav in Germany, and he said the Noshim are Potter. So it seems in Germany they didn't go, in Galicia they didn't go, in Poland they didn't go, in the Swedish lands they didn't go, in the Little they didn't go. It's true that the Binyan Sin is from the Mechayvim. There's a Drosh some Soif from Chelik Gimel on Tzadik Beis where he mentions that they are Chayiv, and that's because he was a Talmud, probably was a Talmud of Reb Nosson Adler, and that's why he says so. Now the Minchas Elazar, who is arguing on the Toras Chesed Lubiner, and says, what's the problem? Why do the ladies have to go into the Menshul? And why do you have to bring the Sefer Torah into the ladies' shul? Just like the Megillah, they laid it from the demon dimension. The ladies are standing in the desert Noshim, and they hear it from there in the Yotzeh. Why can't they do the same with Parsha Zohar? So that's what his argument with the Toras Chesed is. He doesn't really go in right there and say that Noshim are Mamish Mechuyev, but in the Darkei Chaim V'Sholem, which are the Minhagim of Munkat Sharov, of the Minchas Elazar, Ois Tov Lamed Hey, it says that the Minchas Elazar was Mazhir LaNoshim Lelech Ishmoya Parsha Zohar. So the Minchas Elazar also was Mechayiv Noshim to go. Now, Chazon Nochum was a brother to the Shavin Rov, in Simon Pei, he was a Galician, he says they should go also. Maral Diskin was in the Lit, and later in Yerushalayim, he also says they should go. Sleichemer was a Svardisher, he brings a Marech Zayin Klal Yud Gimel, he brings from Svardisher Gedolim, Mr. Samelech, Noshim should Yego. So we find Lekan or Lekan. So what I'm suggesting is that Hayois, the Mogen Avrom, in many places can concur with his idea that he yoitz with Vayov Amalek, and especially that we said that the Purim of Noshim from Parsha Zohar is because of Nabnois Mulchama, which is Parsha Zohar at the end of Kiseitze. But the mitzvah of remembering Amalek, that Amalek comes, that is actually more applicable in Vayov Amalek. So Purim morning, that's when the Noshim should come 10 minutes before Mikra Megillah, and they should listen to Vayov Amalek, and then they'll be yoitze all the Shittas. They'll be yoitze the Shittas, even according to those that part of them, even those that are Mechai of them, you could be yoitze with Vayov Amalek. At the end of the contrast, I brought you here an interesting aside. I brought you over here from the Sefer Orchos Rabbeinu, which quotes the Minhagim of Chazon Ish and the Minhagim of the Stipler Goyim. So it says over here, I underlined 4 of them. It says, hey, by Purim, it says, Moiri v'Rabbi Shlita, that means the discipler, Tzechat Tzaddik Kodesh L'Vrocha, Yameir is benois, will woke up his daughters, after Shoy Katama, it's Moiri v'Ktar, Kedesha Yechol of Besek, Shmoy Kriya Zohar. So, Omar HaMechaber, Rabbi Seinu Zal, HaSoivim, Chigam Nochim Chayov, Yisayim, Achsam Soivim, B'Shem Rabbi, Agon HaKodesh L'Vrocha, Na'alus Atzal, Opinion Sin, HaChadosh Simon Ches, and all those others that I mentioned. Omar Li Agon Rabbi Kanievsky Shlita, so his uncle said no, and his father said yes. Then it says over here, interestingly, the Mechaber of the Orchos Rabbeinu, Avram Horowitz writes, he writes that an incident happened with Shoyisi b'Tveria b'Shabbos Parsha Zohar v'Shalti Misham es Moiri v'Rabbi Shlita Zatzukol b'Yom Hei Shalafoni on Thursday before Parsha Zohar. Like today, I had the Shaila. And again, the Kriyas Parsha Zohar b'Sefer Torah shehat tzadikim ksav arizal, that means Rashem havuchim. The backwards tzadik, which is ksav arizal or ksav velish, all the Sefer Torah shom hoyu b'ksav kazeh. In Tveria, all the Sefer Torah were ksav arizal. There was no ksav b'Yosef there with the tzadik the right way. They were always backwards. The Sholach Limoirev and Yodua that the Chazon Ish held that those were an addition from Chapsik Tzvi and those form were possible. So he sent me back an answer. Eight say they chavos cause zochor b'kriyas ha'torah b'purim b'bnei barak k'mogen Avram b'mishnah berusim tavresh basic kom Pesachya. So he told him, look at that. You don't worry about it. You be Shabbos in Tveria. The Sefer Torah might not be kosher, but you'll be yoitz with Vayovay Amalek. So there's already a man, and the disciple told him you could be yoitz with it. The next, in Oizayin writes, Mashakos Mishnah Berurah Anal Parshas Zochar yoitz al pi adchad v'meshi yishma akri b'purim Parshas Vayovay Amalek kirish moed v'rab shlita tzatukel b'shem Mashakos al pi adchak. What does that mean? In the Bigala Takona Shikro Nisam b'Shabbos before. He said Takona. You have to hear it Shabbos Parshas Zochar before Purim. Avol mitzvah Zochar yetze lechatchila b'kriyas Zukah demucha b'Megillah daf Yud Ches Amarav Gisel mekredesh al Magen Avram l'din zeh v'chein mashma b'Sharatzi and Shom v'chein mashma Magen Avram mitzvah Zochar yetze lechatchila as a machzah shekel the mekredesh b'Megillah daf Yud Ches. And at the bottom over here, Nois Ches, he writes, interestingly, my Rebbe, Stipler, told me, he also has in mind to the Yoitze, the midst of B'Chiras Amalek. Shemo lo shama heitev hakoil kol Parshas Zochar b'Shabbos Zochar. Okay, it was hard of hearing. Nevertheless, he said he tried to hear it then, but he wanted to make sure he hears it then also b'Shabbos Zochar. People that are medagdik for mitzvahs, they have the custom, they have in mind, 4 times a year by the Kriya, twice b'Kriyas Parshas Zochar, b'Shabbos Zochar, b'Shabbos Parshas Kiseitze, b'Kriyas Vayovay Amalek, b'Parshas Shalach u'Purim. So whenever the lane Vayovay Amalek, whenever the lane Zochar Zochar Amalek, you should have to have in mind this mitzvah. That's how the medagdik are noyek. In the Parsha there, it says, K'soiv zoisi koren b'sefer v'sim b'osnei Yehoshua. That's what it says in the Parsha Vayovay Amalek. It says, K'soiv zoisi koren b'sefer. Write this down b'sefer. So the shaila here is, why does it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Moshe Rabbeinu, write this down in the sefer? We don't find any place else in the whole Torah about all the other mitzvahs in the Torah. Write this down. Why does it say specifically by Melchemes Amalek K'soiv zoisi koren b'sefer? So the Amudei Or says, Amudei Kepshat, says that the Torah was written at the end of the 40 years in the Midbar. For 40 years, how were Yidden Mekayim the mitzvah of B'Chiras Amalek? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu right after the Milchama, write this down b'sefer. Every year, the Yidden in the Midbar read Parshas Vayovay Amalek for 40 years to be Mekayim the mitzvah of B'Chiras Amalek. That's what they did for 40 years. That's what they were Mekayim. If you can ask a kasha, the Gemara in Shavuos Daf Lamed Ches says that Shavuah b'Nekitas Chayfetz can only be with a Sefer Torah. And a Sefer Torah that's choser is possible, and you can't be Yoitzakri. If somebody were today to take a klaf and write down just Parshas Zochar or Parshas Vayovay Amalek and read from the klaf, it would not be Yoitz the mitzvah of the Takonos Chachomim to read Parshas Zochar. You have to read it Haksav from a kosher Sefer Torah. It's not a kosher Sefer Torah, an entire Sefer Torah, you're not the kind of mitzvah. So how are the Yoitz in the middle? So Tosfos over there asks Akash on the Gemara. If you're not Yoitze, Shavuah b'Nekitas Chayfetz only with a Sefer Torah, how is Avraham Avinu Mashbi Eliezer Nekitas Chayfetz with mitzvahs Milah if it's not a Sefer Torah? You can't be Yoitze with any other mitzvah only with a Sefer Torah. So Tosfos answers. In the second parent, Tosfos says that when there was no Sefer Torah, that mitzvah was just as good as a Sefer Torah. So what I want to say is, the same is true with the Parsha of Vayovay Amalek. Till there wasn't the whole Sefer Torah, with Parsha Zochar in it, at the end of the 40 years, the whole 40 years in the Midbar, there was no other Sefer Torah. They were Yoitze with that Ksav. That Ksav of Vayovay Amalek was the Mbokoim of Sefer Torah. That's how they were Yoitze, the Kriyam Yitrech HaKsav, and reading Vayovay Amalek. So it comes out that for 40 years in the Midbar, Yidden relied on the Magen Avraham. For 40 years, they were Yoitze, the mitzvah of B'Chiras Amalek, with reading the Parsha of Vayovay Amalek and not in Parsha Zochar at the end of Kiseitze. Now it says, the Simba Osne Yeshua, put it into Yeshua's ear. What does it mean, the Simba Osne Yeshua? So the Guru says, the Simba Osne Yeshua means, the Gemara in Bava Basra Daf Chafalov Amar Aleph says that Yoav made a mistake. His Rebbe taught him, Timche es Zochar Amalek, only the Schorim of Amalek, not the Nekevis. He didn't have Nekudas, and he read it wrong. And the Mele, Yoav made a mistake, and he didn't kill out the Nekevis, he only killed out the Schorim. So, the Guru says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, writing it down is not enough. You also have to tell it to him in his ear that he should hear that the Nekudas are not Zochar Amalek, but Zecher Amalek. We should know it's Zeicher Amalek and includes the Nekevitz too, not just the Zechorim. That's the Gro. But my question is, very nice, you have to tell it what he should hear. But it's an interesting way of saying you should tell. The Pasuk should say, write it down by Sefer and tell your Yeshua, say it to your Yeshua, mention it to your Yeshua, read it to your Yeshua. What is it putting it in his ear? What is the meaning of those words? Put it in his ear. So to for this, there's a Mordecai Sfasem. The Sfasem says that in Megillas Esther, it says, when the Megillah introduces Mordechai HaTzadik to us, it tells you he was Ish Yehudi and he was Ish Yemini. So the Gemara in Megillah asked the Kasha, Ish Yehudi means he was from Shevet Yehuda. Ish Yemini means he was from Shevet Binyamin. Well, was he from Shevet Yehuda or was he from Shevet Binyamin? So the Gemara answers that he was, from his father's side, he was from Shevet Binyamin, from his mother's side, he was from Shevet Yehuda. Now we have to understand, the Megillah ends off, what is the purpose in ending off the Megillah? It's so anticlimactic. End of the Megillah, we're giving you directions to look up the history of Mordechai Tzaddik in the history books of the Malchim Modai Poros. The Megillah is not a directory telling you where to look. And I don't know anybody that actually listens to what it says in the Megillah that take out the history books of Malchim Modai Poros and look up and see what happened with Mordechai Tzaddik. What's the purpose in writing this over there? So I go in Agodel, Reb Cheskel Abramsky, Zechat Tzaddik Levrocha, said Pshat in that Potzik Moiridik. He said like this: as somebody might think when he finishes reading the Megillah, that the Megillah is recording history, telling you what happened in Shushan Habira, and they won't realize that it's Baruch HaKodesh Nemra and it's Kisvei HaKodesh. So they ended off the Megillah by telling you there's nothing in here for historical purposes only. You should know history. Look in Malchim Modai Poros. History is not over here. Here is Kisvei HaKodesh, Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. Well, if that's the case, then why was it important historically to tell us, to introduce us, that Mordechai had lineage from Shevet Yehuda and from Shevet Binyamin? How does that fit into the Ruach HaKodesh and the Kisvei HaKodesh and the Megillas Esther? Why is that important in introducing who Mordechai Tzaddik was? Why do we have to know who his Yichus is? So to answer that, the Sfasem says like this, Mordechai in the Welt. He says that there's a Medrash. In the Medrash it says that Rachel and Leah had two opposite personalities. Leah was a speaker and Rachel was a schweiger. She was quiet, she didn't talk. And he lists off that all of the descendants of Leah are speakers and all of the descendants of Rachel are quiet. He lists off, it says like this: Yehuda was a son of Leah, and Yehuda was Moide, right? Sotkom Imeni. David HaMelech is from Leah, Shevet Yehuda. David HaMelech, the whole Sefer Dilem, he's busy speaking. Daniel was from Shevet Yehuda, the whole Sefer Daniel, he's speaking. On the other hand, Binyamin was a son of Rachel. Rachel kept the secret. She didn't tell Yaakov about that Lavan was trying to cheat him. Binyamin, the Evan of Binyamin in the Choshen is Yoshpei. Yeshpei, he has a mouth. But for 22 years, he kept the secret. He knew all along about Mechiras Yosef, and he did not tell his father. He kept the secrets. Because he came from Rachel, they keep secrets. Same way, we find Shaul HaMelech was also from Shevet Binyamin. And it says, after Shmuel HaNavi was Mamlechim, he came home, he didn't tell his father, hey, Ta, they made me king. He didn't say it. He was quiet. He kept the secrets. And the same way, Esther was from Shevet Binyamin. Ein Esther Magdedes. Esther doesn't talk either. She keeps the secret. So Mordechai Tzaddik had in him the tchunas of both, being a speaker and keeping secrets. He had both tchunas in him. And the gematria of Mordechai is 274. And the Mekubolim say the gematria of Rachel Leah is also 274. Mordechai is a combination of Rachel and Leah, a speaker and a schweiger, both all in one. But the Sfasem doesn't elaborate exactly why is that important for us to know in the Megillah. But Yismach Moshe, this parsha, says, he says like this. He says, the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu, Ksoiv zoy zikaron v'sefer v'sim ba'ozne Yeshua. Put into Yeshua's ear. Now, the Sefer Halachos Gedolos, the Bahag, writes that Megillas Esther was Ne'emar LeMoshe b'Sinai, verbatim. The entire Megillah, word for word, was told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. The Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos argues with him and says it's impossible because the story didn't happen yet, so it can't be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told it to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ramban answers the time of the Rambam, and he says the Bahag is right, because the Gemara in Megillah says, Ksoiv Zois Mashakosov Kan Ube Mishnah Torah. Write down what it says in the end of Bishalach Vayovay Amalek, and Zocher Yeshashlos Amalek at the end of Mishnah, at the end of Parashat Seitz in Mishnah Torah. Zikoro in Mashanemer Ben Neviim, write that down, which it says in the Ma'asav Shaul HaMelech with Agag, and Basefer means Megillas Esther. Write that down. So he says, so probably the Rambam learns that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, there's going to be there's going to be a zikron, there's going to be a basefer. When it happens, there's a mitzvah to write it. But the Ramban learns it means write it now. Tell it over now. So, but the thing is, if everybody would know about what happened in the end of the Megillah, nobody would have done tshuva because they wouldn't have been scared. Chazal tell us, it was greater, the act of accomplished more than all 48 Nevi'im in causing him to do tshuva. Yidden only did tshuva because they were afraid of the Geseder of Lahash V'Larigol, because they were afraid. If they would have known what it says in the end of the Megillah, that the whole Geseder of Haman would become public, they never would have done tshuva, and the nace could have never happened. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, the sim ba'os de Yeshua, tell it to Yeshua in his ear, tell him over the whole Megillah as a secret. And Yeshua is the Manigador, and he'll tell it to the next Manigador, and to the next Manigador, till it gets to Mordechai Tzaddik. When it gets to Mordechai Tzaddik, then at Mordechai Tzaddik, he will write down the Megillah. So Mordechai Tzaddik, it says in the Posik that V'amelech v'Haman yoshvu l'ishtois v'oir Shushan navoicha. The whole city of Shushan knew about the Gezerah. The next Posik says that Mordechai yod eskol asher nasa. What does the Posik have to say? Mordechai was sitting b'shar HaMelech. Of course he knew everything that happened. All of Shushan knew what happened in Gezerah. What does it mean? Mordechai yod eskol asher nasa. Zogt the Yismach Moshe. Mordechai Yoda as Kol Asher Nasa means he knew everything, even what's going to happen. He knew that also. So on the outside, he was carrying on and screaming and hollering. But in the house, he put on his big day Yom Tov, he drank a l'chaim, and he sang V'napoichu, because he knew already the end of the story, what's going to happen. So Yoda is Kol Asher Nasa. So the Megillah has to start off and introduce you why Mordechai is the man for the job. He was Ishihud, it means he was a tremendous speaker, he was a great orator. So he could be more Yidden to do tshuva. He needed a man for that job because he needed something more Yidden in that door to do tshuva. But Ishiyamini, he also had to be a person that can keep the secret, because if he would leak out the secret, it wouldn't have helped his droshes that we more everybody. So that's why the Megillah starts off, says the Yitzmach Moshe, Ish Yehud and Ishiyamini, that Mordechai had in himself both of these capabilities, that he was capable of being more Yidden to do tshuva, and also is capable of keeping the secrets from the nace could have happened, and only through him would shaykh the nace to happen. So the Eibers to help him, we should have a good Shabbos, and we should also have a freilichen Purim. We should mekayim the mitzvah the Turosoi, and like the Sefer the smak rice, that we should all be zoiche to be mekayim the mitzvah of Zechiras Mechias Amolek in the Oifen that. We should remember, besides the Mechemes Amolek, we should also not forget, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tilona Miyodoi, Bavuzet Tia Yerosel Punenu Luti Nechta, Ubazeh Yitalon Ekach Linokim Imenu Omen Selah.